At my sister's wedding, I asked, "Where's my seat?" She laughed, "Wherever the helpers sit." So I took off my jacket, handed it to her groom. I said, "Good luck explaining the $8,000 I just canceled." Hey there. We're working hard to hit our first 1,000 subscribers. If you love true, emotional stories, hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. Now let's get into the story. When I stepped into the wedding hall and asked, "Where's my seat?" my sister didn't even blink. She just laughed, loud enough for her bridesmaids to hear. Then she turned to me and said, "Wherever the helpers sit." That's when I knew I hadn't been invited to celebrate. I'd been brought here to serve. My name's Ethan, I'm 27, and I wish I could say this kind of treatment from my sister was new. But it wasn't. It just had more glitter and champagne on it this time. We were raised under the same roof, but you wouldn't have known it. Julia, that's my older sister, was the family star. Straight A's, prom queen, first in the family to go to med school. And me? I fixed bikes in the garage and stayed home when Dad got sick. When he passed, everyone said I'd had so much potential once. They said it like a eulogy, like I died with him. 3 weeks before Julia's wedding, I got a text from my mom. "Hey, Jules needs help with the wedding setup. Can you come by Friday morning?" No formal invitation. No RSVP. No mention of being a guest. I asked if I was invited to the actual wedding or just the prep, and she replied with, "Of course you're invited. Your family." Then she followed up with a photo of the seating chart, where my name was nowhere to be seen. Still, I showed up. Call it loyalty. Call it stupidity. Part of me still thought, maybe this is the moment they see me again. Not as the disappointment, but as someone who's always been there. So I bought them a gift. Not just a toaster or a blender or whatever they already had registered. I wanted to do something big. Julia had told me months ago about this place in Santorini where she and Greg, her fiancé, were dreaming of going for their honeymoon. A $8,000 all-inclusive trip, booked through a friend of mine who runs a private travel agency. I paid for it. Full amount. Told Julia it was my gift. She cried on the phone. Said, "You didn't have to do that." And I said, "I know. I wanted to." What I didn't say was that I hoped, just a little, that this might be the thing that finally made her see me as something more than the family footnote. The day of the wedding, I showed up early, suit pressed, tie straight, gift confirmation already sent. The whole venue was buzzing. White chairs arranged in perfect rows. Pink peonies everywhere. Classical music playing softly through portable speakers. I didn't see a place card with my name. Didn't see my name on the reception list. So I found Julia near the bridal suite and asked her where I should sit. She looked me up and down like she'd forgotten I existed and said, with the fakest smile I've ever seen, "Wherever the helpers sit." Then she turned away and laughed into her champagne glass. It wasn't just humiliating. It felt strategic. I looked around and saw what she meant. The helpers were the catering staff, the guys moving tables, and the sound technician. One of them even offered me a walkie-talkie and asked if I was with the AV team. I stepped back and checked my phone. Reread the message confirming I'd booked their honeymoon. $8,000. Gone. For what? To be treated like I was just another employee. No seat. No speech. No toast. No name even mentioned. And that's when I made the quiet decision that would flip their entire wedding on its head. I didn't storm out. I didn't make a scene. I simply turned, walked into the empty side hall where the caterers were taking breaks, and pulled out my phone. I stared at the screen for a moment, my thumb hovering over the app my travel agent friend had set me up with. The booking was still active. The voucher hadn't been redeemed yet. The trip to Santorini was scheduled for the day after the wedding. I had less than 24 hours before it was non-refundable. Technically, it was in my name. Julia and Greg just had the confirmation code, which I had texted to her 3 weeks ago, thinking I was doing something meaningful. I didn't hit cancel. Not yet. Instead, I sat on a crate in the corner of the hall and just listened. Through the walls, I could hear them all talking, laughing. I heard my mom gushing about how elegant Julia looked. My uncle Mark cracking a joke about how I probably wasn't showing up dressed like that. He didn't know I was 10 feet away. I heard someone say Greg had finally leveled up, now that he was marrying a doctor. That he came from humble beginnings. Greg's dad owned 3 car dealerships. But yeah, humble. I got up and wandered outside to the reception area. Everything looked perfect. Julia had always been obsessed with perfection. White tablecloths, floral arrangements curated from her Pinterest board, fairy lights wrapped around every pole. A string quartet warming up. It was so precisely her. Shiny on the outside, rotten on the inside. I saw Greg across the courtyard talking to one of his groomsmen, and even from a distance, I could read the arrogance in his posture. The guy never liked me. He once cornered me at a family dinner and asked, "Do you ever feel like you could have been something if you just tried harder?" I'd been the one taking care of Dad in his final months. I dropped out of school, put off a job opportunity, lived on instant noodles while Julia was on her third spring break trip. Greg knew that. Still said it with a straight face. A voice behind me broke my thoughts. Hey, Ethan, you gonna help with the chairs? It was Julia's friend Danielle, the unofficial wedding planner. She waved a clipboard like I was one of her interns. I nodded, tight-lipped. Moved the chairs. Stayed quiet. Inside, I was boiling. They all wanted to forget what I'd done. Forget who I was. Pretend I was a ghost floating in and out of their lives when convenient. The gift? The time? The effort? It didn't matter. I was useful. Until I wasn't. By the time the ceremony started, I was seated at the back. No official chair. No name tag. Just squeezed between a speaker stand and the guy manning the projector. A server bumped me twice trying to get through with trays of glasses. From a distance, I watched Julia walk down the aisle. I'll give her this. She looked beautiful. Calm. Untouchable. She always had that look, even as a kid. Like she was made for more, and the rest of us were the background noise. When Greg kissed her, people clapped like it was the royal wedding. I didn't. I just stood up and quietly walked outside. I checked my phone again. One tap. That's all it would take. One tap, and their romantic honeymoon dreams would vanish. The all-white villa with the infinity pool? Gone. The spa days and wine tours? Gone. The carefully filtered photos they'd probably planned to post? Gone. But I waited. I wasn't going to rush this. I wanted them to earn it. After the ceremony, I tried to keep to the edges of the crowd, but there was no escaping it. At one point, my mom walked past me, didn't even say hi, just gave me a little nod like I was someone's +1 she didn't quite recognize. Then I saw Julia and Greg by the head table, laughing with their friends, clinking glasses. And that's when Greg caught my eye and called out, Ethan, man, thanks again for helping out today. You've always been a solid dude. I wanted to spit, but instead I smiled. Anytime, I said. He walked over, beer in hand, and dropped his voice a little. Hey, by the way, Julia mentioned something about the honeymoon gift. Just wanted to say, super generous of you. That place looks insane. Yeah, I said. It's a nice spot. Hope it didn't cost you too much, he said, with a smirk that said he didn't care either way. You'd be surprised, I said. Then he leaned in, clapped me on the shoulder, and added, honestly, man, you're a better brother than I thought. There it was. Not thanks. Not, we'll pay you back. Just this smug little pat on the head. Like I'd been a good dog fetching the ball. Something in me cracked. I pulled out my phone again. Opened the booking app. This time, I didn't hesitate. I tapped cancel, and the screen flashed. Are you sure you want to cancel this reservation? I hit yes. The trip vanished. The voucher was void. The money, refunded to my card. And all they were left with was a code that meant nothing. No alert. No warning. But I wasn't finished. I waited for the perfect moment. That came during the reception. Julia was making the rounds, glowing, accepting compliments like royalty. Greg was already half drunk and making awkward jokes to people he barely knew. A DJ had taken over the music, and the dance floor was filling up. I walked toward the head table. No one noticed at first. I was just the guy from the back. The helper. No one expected anything from me. I stepped right up to Greg, who was laughing at some story with his groomsmen, and slipped off my jacket. Calmly, slowly. Then I folded it neatly and held it out to him. He blinked. Oh, what's this? I smiled. Good luck explaining the $8,000 I just canceled. Silence. The people nearest us stopped talking. Even the music felt like it dipped. Julia turned from across the table, confusion on her face. What are you talking about? She asked. I looked right at her. The Santorini trip. You remember, the one I paid for. The one you never intended to pay me back for. Her face drained of color. You didn't. Oh, I did. Greg stood there frozen, jacket still in his hands. I didn't wait for their reaction. I turned and walked out. It was the first time in years I'd seen Julia speechless. Outside, the air was cool, quiet. I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a weight for so long. I forgot how it felt to walk without it. I didn't drive home right away. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring through the windshield at the perfectly manicured hedges around the venue. Inside, people were probably whispering already. Maybe someone tried to brush it off like I'd made a joke. But Julia knew I wasn't joking. And Greg? He might have still been holding my jacket. My phone buzzed once. A text from Julia. What the hell did you do? I didn't answer. Then another. This better be a joke. Tell me this is a joke. Asterisk. And another. Ethan, if you really canceled that trip, you've just ruined everything. Greg took out a loan in my name for the rest of the honeymoon stuff. That one made me sit back and blink. A loan? So, not only had they taken my gift without gratitude, they'd leveraged it. Spent money they didn't have on the assumption that I'd come through like always. They built their fantasy life on my generosity, like it was a foundation made of stone. Except it wasn't stone. It was a fuse. And they just watched it burn down. The texts kept coming, faster now. I stopped reading after the 12th one. She was trying to guilt me, then threaten me, then negotiate. I could already see the strategy. Make me feel like I was overreacting, paint me as the petty one, the bad brother ruining the happiest day of her life. But the happiest day of her life had been constructed on a lie, that I'd keep playing the role I'd always played. Later that night, I got a voicemail from my mom. You made a scene. You embarrassed your sister in front of her friends. You always do this, Ethan. You just have to make it about you. She didn't ask why I did it. Didn't even mention the money. Just launched straight into the usual script. I'm dramatic. I'm difficult. I ruin things. Funny how they all managed to forget what I gave. No one mentioned the years I spent holding this family together when no one else would. When Julia was in med school and couldn't come home for a single holiday. When Mom was off grieving in wine country. When Greg was busy focusing on his career. It was me who stayed. Me who ran the errands. Me who sat by Dad's bed while he forgot my name, but still smiled when I held his hand. But sure, I was the problem. The next morning, I woke up to 34 missed messages. 3 voicemails. A few from Greg too, which surprised me. I thought he'd keep his hands clean. One of them said, "Hey man, listen, I know things got a little intense yesterday. Julia's freaking out, but I'm sure we can work this out. Can we talk?" Another said, "You really gonna sink our whole honeymoon over a misunderstanding? I thought you were better than that." I didn't reply to that one either. I went out for breakfast instead. Sat in a quiet booth at a diner with strong coffee and no expectations. I watched the sun come up and realized something that hit harder than anything Julia could say. No one in my family had ever actually seen me as an adult. Not really. They saw a version of me stuck in time. The dropout. The disappointment. The helper. The guy who'd never say no. The guy who'd come running even when he wasn't invited. But now, I wasn't running anymore. Later that day, I logged into the family group chat, the one where Julia had been posting countdowns for the wedding, hotel links, dress previews, and endless filtered selfies. I scrolled to the last photo she posted, a selfie of her and Greg holding up champagne glasses with the caption, "Married AF. Santorini, here we come." I hit reply, uploaded a screenshot of the cancellation confirmation, and typed 4 simple words. "Guess you're not." Then I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and went for a walk. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No one called. No one texted. No one knocked on my door. The silence should have been peaceful, but I knew better. This was the cold before the storm. It broke on Tuesday. I got an envelope in the mail. Inside was a check. $3,500. No note. No explanation. Just the check, signed by Julia. It wasn't the full amount, not even half. But it was enough to say, "I know you're serious, and I need you to stop." I turned it over in my hands for a few seconds. Then I shredded it. If she thought money could fix this, she still didn't get it. The trip wasn't the problem. The money wasn't the point. It was the disrespect. The erasure. The years of being used like a backup plan. Someone to lean on when things were hard, but invisible the moment things were going well. And the truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. Not even bitter. What I felt now was done. Not in the dramatic, slamming the door kind of way, but the quiet kind. The steady kind. The kind of done that makes you smile at the silence, not dread it. I looked around my small apartment. The plants I kept alive. The books I actually had time to read now. The life I was building that didn't revolve around trying to impress people who never looked closely enough to care. I opened my phone and deleted the group chat. Blocked Julia's number. Archived the voicemails from my mom and Greg, and tucked them away into a folder labeled, simply, noise. And then I made a new contact. Me. No more playing the role of the helper. No more giving to people who wouldn't give back. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cold drink and watched the sun slip behind the buildings. Somewhere across town, Julia was probably trying to rebook a honeymoon with a canceled voucher and a husband who now had to explain why he'd taken out debt in her name. And me? I slept well. For the first time in years. 2 days later, my cousin Ben called. He's the only one in the family I still talk to regularly. Julia always saw him as beneath her because he went into construction instead of college, but Ben's the only person who ever showed up when my dad was dying. He'd come by after work with takeout and sit in silence when I was too exhausted to talk. "Hey," he said, casually, like he wasn't about to drop a bomb. "You got a minute?" I was still half asleep, sipping day-old coffee. "Yeah," I said. "What's up?" "I thought you should know. Julia's been running her mouth. She told everyone you tried to blackmail her." I blinked. "Blackmail?" "She's saying you threatened to cancel the honeymoon unless she paid you more than what it cost." I let out a short laugh. "So now I'm extorting people?" Ben sighed. "You know how it goes. She makes herself the victim and spins it fast enough to make people dizzy." I should have seen it coming. When Julia lost control of a narrative, she didn't fight for the truth, she rewrote it. And this time, it wasn't just about family gossip. She wanted to discredit me completely. That's when Ben added. But that's not even the part that pissed me off. There was a pause. I could hear wind in the background, maybe from the open window of his truck. She told me Greg borrowed money from her for the IVF trip. Said it was all her savings. Said you were the one who flaked at the last second and ruined their chance at starting a family. My stomach twisted. That was new. I didn't know about the IVF part. Julia hadn't told me the Santorini trip had a medical purpose. She'd only mentioned it as a romantic escape, a once-in-a-lifetime honeymoon. Now I realized there was another reason they'd gone all out for that specific resort, and that made it worse. Because it wasn't just about them taking advantage of me financially. It was about them deliberately lying. If she'd said, "This is a fertility consultation we've been planning for months," I probably would have offered to help again. Not because I owed them, but because I know what it's like to want something deeply and feel powerless to get it. But she never told me. She used my kindness, my money, my silence, and still found a way to flip the story into her being the victim. Ben was still talking. And apparently Greg's parents found out he forged some loan paperwork. Got a lawyer involved. I blinked. Wait, forged, Ben said. He took out a private loan, but listed Julia as the co-signer. Without her knowing. Now it's in collections because he missed a payment last month. Her name's on the paperwork. I sat back in my chair, stunned. Greg forged her signature? That wasn't petty. That was criminal. And Julia was too proud, or too trapped, to admit it publicly. So she spun a new version. I had somehow destroyed their lives with a canceled gift, instead of the truth, that her husband had already detonated the bomb before I even touched my phone. It hit me in a slow wave. They didn't just use me. They used me to cover for something that was already broken. Something way deeper than family favoritism. Greg had been reckless. Julia had been complicit. And they both expected me to clean up the mess quietly, like always. This wasn't about a trip. It was a cover-up. I thanked Ben for telling me, and hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, letting the pieces rearrange in my head. They never wanted me at the wedding to celebrate. They wanted me there to be a human shield, to keep up appearances, to be the good brother who shows up, pays up, shuts up. That was the only role they'd ever written for me. And the moment I stepped off script, the whole production crumbled. But that's the thing about keeping secrets. They rot from the inside. Greg's financial schemes were bound to surface eventually. Julia's lies about the gift were going to catch up. I had just been the spark, not the fire. Later that week, I got a letter. A real one. Not an email. Not a text. It was from Julia. Handwritten. Neat cursive like she used to write in high school when she wanted something from Dad. It started with, "I don't know what happened to you, but the brother I grew up with would have never done something so cruel." I almost laughed. It went on. About how disappointed she was. How I'd embarrassed her. How she was humiliated in front of people who mattered. She never said thank you for the gift. Never mentioned Greg's loan. Never admitted the lie. Just page after page of polished guilt trips, like she was writing for a courtroom drama. The final paragraph read, "If you had any integrity left, you'd at least return the money I sent you. But I see now that you've changed. You're not who I thought you were." She was right. I had changed. And I wasn't who she thought I was. Because for the first time, I didn't need her approval. I didn't crave her praise. I didn't see her pedestal as a place worth climbing toward anymore. I didn't respond. I put the letter in a shoebox with other old family scraps. Birthday cards signed with love that I never felt. Holiday photos with smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Things I used to keep in case I needed proof that I belonged somewhere. But I don't need proof anymore. Not from them. I walked into my living room, stood over the shredder, and dropped her check inside again. One more time, for good measure. Then I picked up my phone, booked a 3-day getaway up north, and clicked confirm. I'd take myself on a quiet trip. No plans. No obligations. No one waiting for me to serve them or save them. A week passed. Not a word from Julia. Not a word from my mom, either. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. No passive-aggressive check-ins. No guilt-ridden family reminders. Just stillness. And despite everything, part of me kept waiting for it. Like a phantom itch, you don't want to scratch it, but it still tingles. But silence can be healing, too. I filled the space. I started reading again. Real reading, not doom scrolling. I called old friends I hadn't talked to in months. I fixed the leaky kitchen pipe I'd been ignoring for a year. I made pancakes from scratch for no reason on a Wednesday. Life didn't feel dramatic anymore. It felt like mine. Then one afternoon, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I checked the peephole. It was Greg, wearing a wrinkled button-up shirt, hands in his pockets, looking nothing like the smug finance guy who once laughed at my shoes during dinner. He looked tired. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Ethan," he said, eyes low. "What do you want?" He took a slow breath. "I'm not here to fight. I just need to say something." I didn't say yes, but I didn't close the door either. He glanced behind him. maybe making sure no one was watching, and then said, I messed up. No smile. No slickness. Just 3 plain words. I didn't respond, so he kept going. I forged her name. On the loan. You were right. A chill ran through me. I hadn't told anyone that detail besides Ben. Not directly. Which meant Julia knew. And she told Greg I knew. Probably blamed me for the fallout. Greg looked at me again. I thought it was going to work out. I thought we'd go on the trip, come back, and I'd pay it off before anyone noticed. But I was stupid. I was scared she'd find out how deep I was in already. And when you canceled, he trailed off. I finished it for him. You lost the last card in the house of cards. He nodded. Yeah. I waited. Let him sit in it. After a moment, he added, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just thought you should hear it from me. It wasn't your fault. You didn't ruin anything. I did. That part. I believed. He looked different. Not just worn down, but hollowed out. And for the first time, I didn't feel hatred toward him. I felt pity. Still, I didn't open the door any wider. I wasn't about to invite him in for coffee. Instead, I said, you told me once that I could have been something if I tried harder. He flinched. Yeah, he said. That was a crappy thing to say. I raised an eyebrow. It was. He looked down. You were always something. I just didn't see it. She didn't either. We used you. There it was. The real apology. It didn't fix anything. Didn't undo the years. Didn't make me want to shake his hand or hug it out. But it was something. I gave him a small nod. Thanks for saying that, I said finally. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, the trip was her idea. But the lie was mine. And then he walked down the stairs and disappeared. I closed the door, locked it, leaned against it, and exhaled. Later that night, I pulled out an old photo, one from years ago. Me and Julia as kids, both sitting on the front steps of our childhood house. She had a popsicle in one hand and an ice pack on her knee. I just caught her after she fell off her bike. She was crying in the photo, but holding my hand. That was the last time I could remember her needing me without using me. I didn't feel bitter looking at it. Just older. The next morning, I woke up to a single message. From my mom. It said, call me when you're ready. I miss you. No threats. No guilt. Just 6 words. I stared at them for a while, then locked my phone and set it face down. Not yet. Not until they're ready to speak to me like someone they can't control. But maybe someday. Maybe. Until then, I had a train to catch. I packed light. Just a duffel bag and a playlist full of songs I hadn't listened to in years. The kind you only really hear when your mind's clear. I took the early train out of the city, toward the coast. No plans. No schedule. Just distance. And breathing room. I watched the buildings blur into trees. Sunlight filtered through the windows, warm and quiet. I smiled to myself. They wanted me to sit with the helpers. And they were right. Because that's where I learned what kind of person I didn't want to become. The cabin was simple. Wood floors, a little fireplace, a view of the lake. No TV. No Wi-Fi. Just stillness. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. I spent the first 2 hours doing absolutely nothing. And for the first time in my adult life, it didn't feel like wasted time. The quiet didn't scare me anymore. I cooked dinner on a small skillet, read half a book in one sitting, and watched the stars for longer than I thought I'd last in the cold. I thought about what had happened, the wedding, the seat, the laugh, and how small it all looked from here. There were no fancy speeches. No dramatic, I'm done moment. I hadn't burned bridges. I just stopped pretending I needed to cross them. And that made all the difference. On the second day, I got an email from the travel agency. A survey, rate your experience. I laughed, then clicked 5 stars for the cancellation process and deleted it. Later, I wrote a note. Not to Julia. Not to my mom. To myself. Just a simple message. You didn't walk away. You stood up. Because that's what it was. All those years, I thought strength meant tolerating things. Carrying the weight. Being the bigger person. But sometimes, strength is choosing to stop holding what's breaking you. Julia's wedding didn't break me. It reminded me that I've always had a seat at my own table. I just kept forgetting I could build it. And maybe I was never meant to sit with them anyway. Not because I wasn't worthy, but because I finally knew the difference between being included and being respected. Before I left the cabin, I took one last walk down by the lake. The water was perfectly still, not frozen, just calm. A few geese were drifting by, making ripples that never fought back. Just moved with the current. I like that. Back in the city, I returned to my apartment like it was a home and not a stopgap. I brewed coffee, answered emails, and opened a blank document. Not for work. Not for anyone else. Just to write. Anything. Everything. I don't know if I'll ever be close with Julia again. I don't know if Greg and her will make it through the fallout. I don't even know what my mom meant when she said she missed me, if it was real or just habit. But I do know this. The next time someone laughs in my face and tells me where the helpers sit, I won't need to say a word. They'll know. because I'll already be gone. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.